Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. Briahna, what are we covering?
Well, we're going to touch on why AOC got into hot water on social media while talking about President Biden's push to cancel some student loan debt. And we'll take a closer look at the Don't Say Gay bill's exact restrictions. We'll also look back at the best and worst moments from the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
But first, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited the Ukraine and Poland over the weekend. When asked about sending more aid to Ukraine without provoking Russia or Russian President Vladimir Putin, she said America should not be, quote, bullied by bullies. According to Pelosi, the purpose of her trip was to send a clear message to the world: America stands with our NATO allies and Ukraine. But some European countries are skeptical of the U.S. According to the New York Times, a French defense analyst said there is a sense in Europe that the U.S. is dragging everyone into a different war, citing Biden's comments about, quote, the butcher of Moscow and his infamous Putin must go speech.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., lawmakers are preparing to take up another relief package for Ukraine. Last month, a $13.6 billion package was approved. President Biden is now asking Congress to provide an additional $33 billion.
President Biden got a readout from Pelosi and other Democratic members meeting with Zelensky in Ukraine. Congressman Adam Schiff said there were a lot of things that we discussed that I had not heard before in terms of needs that Ukraine has, leading some to speculate even more aid and weaponry will be sent in the future, which is exactly the kind of endless, gradual ramp up, gradual getting dragged into conflict that I thought we were trying to avoid by the quick, heavy sanctions and the sort of, blitz, like no, back off kind of approach. If we're just going to be in a protracted proxy war with Russia, I mean, that the risks are considerable, right? The risks of eventual accidental nuclear escalation are there. So these are some serious things to contemplate that the Biden administration is giving less and less. At first we gave them, I think, some props for clearly saying no fly zone. Right. That's crazy. But now it's just, okay, this is going to be a commitment forever.
Yeah. Don't be bullied by bullies has to be one of the least diplomatic statements I've ever heard.
It's right up there with hurt people.
Right? Like, one, it's vague. I'm not even really sure what it's supposed to mean. But it basically seems to boil down to don't back down no matter what. Don't back down no matter what. And when you read the statements from these politicians about the goal being to win the war, it becomes increasingly clear that doesn't mean what a negotiated victory is likely to mean when we're talking about a nuclear superpower like Russia and a country like Ukraine, which obviously cannot win a war by any obvious metric of overpowering the other country's military. What we're talking about is using this as a proxy battle, and I think that politicians are concerned, other international figures are concerned, to see statements like Joe Biden's, Putin must go, to see them talk about switching the language more recently to talking about the goal being weakening Russia's power, goals that extend much farther beyond defending Ukraine's sovereignty. I think they're kind of showing their hand in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much more can the American people be, because we are having to accept a lot of suffering due to the inflation, the gas prices, we have economic problems at home. Everything was not rosy and perfect here. And is that what the American people are actually being asked to do? Are they actually being asked, no, this is a war in all but name with Russia, and thus you're going to have to make sacrifices? Don't the people get a say in that? Yeah. Don't we? I mean, right, technically the old-fashioned way, Congress has to declare war on Russia. Mm-hmm. We're not going to do that because we're not formally going to be at war with Russia. But that is unsatisfying from the standpoint of a democracy, how things are decided.
And at this point in the Biden administration, leading up to a midterm year, people are going to notice that we had all of these protracted conversations about how we were going to pay for, support for children and families in the middle of a global pandemic and economic crisis. And I haven't heard a single how you pay for it, as we're talking about another $33 billion for a war effort. We're going to have a segment later about AOC getting into hot water over student loan cancellation, and everybody, including a lot of centrist Democrats, wringing their hands about what this means Republicans to be bailing out this population, and nobody is talking about the disproportionality and what we're willing to spend money on for a population halfway across the world.
Right, completely fair. A point I frequently make, and the hypocrisy is on Republicans as well, who will say, "Oh yes, we're spending too much, all this reckless spending, but we'll spend any amount of money on the military." That's a bipartisan problem, but the hypocrisy is even worse on the Republican side because they have more pronounced or louder supposed commitments to fiscal restraint that just go out the window on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, the First Lady is slated to visit Europe this week, making stops in Romania and Slovakia to meet with Ukrainian refugees. Over the weekend, Ukraine began evacuating civilians from a steel plant outside of Mariupol in efforts to move 1,000 Ukrainians who hunkered down inside the facility to hide from advancing Russian troops. According to President Zelensky, about 100 people have been evacuated so far. However, the evacuation was temporarily paused Sunday due to security concerns. Efforts were expected to resume today at 8 a.m. local time. You know, it's terrible to watch, and it's part
Absolutely.
of why it's so difficult to have these conversations because your natural humanitarian, humanistic instincts are butting up against the reality that we live in a horrible, dangerous, violent world where these kinds of acts are happening all the time. And no one is having a substantive conversation about when and where and why America should continue to behave as the world's policeman. What kinds of aid and interventions are going to best bring the conflict to a close more quickly, as opposed to escalating conflict in a way that is basically allowing the people of Ukraine to be used as cannon fodder in our proxy war to, in the words of now some senior officials, weaken Russia.
Right. I mean, it's a harder situation than some other military situations have been, because there is a clearer aggressor in this case. They're being invaded, and they have the will to fight. They do want to fight. Zelensky has the support and the credibility among his people more than he did before the conflict. So that makes it I think more complicated, genuinely more complicated. But just because they are morally in the right, that they deserve or want support, doesn't mean that the kind of support they want is the right support, or that we're authorized to do it, or that we've authorized our government to do it on our behalf without our say-so. That's just not the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, and how long does that support hold? Does that support still exist absent knowledge that they're getting so much aid and support from the West, from the United States of America?
Right.
The confidence in Zelensky as a leader and desire to keep fighting, does that persist without our support? And what ethical role is the United States then playing in prolonging a conflict that it might very well know is not going to end in a satisfactory way for the people of Ukraine?
No, it's a fair point. It's a very difficult situation though, because they might just want to fight on because it's their home, and even if the whole country is taken over, there's going to be a sort of guerrilla campaign, like that kind of thing, forever until Russia gives up, which I kind of think is going to happen one way or the other.
Well, we'll certainly be here watching for that, covering it as it develops, and I will be looking forward to hearing more from you, Robby, and your radar next.